We are friends who live on mountains.
We are friends who talk good games. And today is Game Design Day. We talk about whether it's better to have silent protagonists or fully fleshed out characters with voices of their own.
Before we get to that, though, we have something incredibly important to talk about, and that is, if you remember, at the very beginning of the original Donkey Kong Country, the reason this entire journey kicks off is because Donkey Kong tries to go to his banana hoard and realize that all of his bananas are gone. At the end of the game, the banana hoard is full of way more bananas than probably anyone or any monkey, that, for that matter, should eat in a lifetime. So my question to
He's
you,
collecting tens of thousands of bananas,
Yeah.
honestly.
what's he doing with those bananas?
Yeah, like, is he going to eat them? Are the apes in general going to eat them? Is there a banana economy? Like, why even did King K. Rool want to steal those bananas?
There's not a lot of backstory as to why he did that, or that I know of.
Also, I never thought about this, but does that sort of mean that all the bananas available to you, drip throughout the game, are basically like the droppings of the hoard while he was fleeing? Like, is he just on a truck driving through these levels and there's like bananas popping off the kind of sticking in midair here and there?
I think that's
As bananas are wont to do.
I like that. I like to think that basically, yeah, he ran off with all the bananas, but it was like he tried to pick them all up at once. Like when you try to grab your entire load of laundry out of the dryer and walk to another room with it without putting it into a hamper, and then socks and
or like when you're sure that you can carry all the groceries from the back of the car at once.
Yeah. It's exactly like that. But
what do you think his yield was? Do you think he like carried 90% of the bananas, or like did he only manage 50% of the bananas by the end?
I think at least 75% of the bananas were there at the end.
Well, so there's an absurd number of bananas then. This is like well more than a lifetime supply of bananas for every ape in the game.
Yeah. I think there's only two ways this can go for me. Either one, Donkey Kong is an incredibly benevolent lord of bananas, and
Lord of the Horde.
And he just kind of lets all the other various Kongs come in and have bananas as they see fit. Or he is basically the Ebenezer Scrooge of bananas and kind of just sits in his cave and lords over everyone and eats bananas and makes them watch him eat bananas with no intention of sharing.
I have a reason to suspect one and not the other. It's called Donkey Kong's Banana Horde. It's not everyone's banana hoard. It's his banana hoard. Maybe that means that like his whole troupe, Funky and Cranky and Diddy, are all basically like, basically they're like his nobilities or his Wall Street coterie, and this is like there's just terrible inequality in the ape world. There's like 5 to 10 monkeys who get all the bananas, and the rest of the jungle is just out of luck fighting for scraps. They're his bananas.
I was just thinking about too, like there's only, like, as far as we know, there's only like 5 or 6 gorillas or Kongs that even exist in Donkey Kong Country. And if that's what it's called, then I think it even more just goes to show that those are
his country.
Purely There's not a lot of benevolence going on.
A darker thought? Yeah. Here's a darker thought. There's only 5 left. There are like 5 apes.
He's Hunger Games them.
Maybe there aren't any humans around, but if there were, maybe the humans eliminated them. There's this tiny group of monkeys. He's gone absolutely nuts for safety. He's determined to never starve, ever. And so the 5 apes left in the jungle have like hoarded all the bananas that are left.
Maybe, I got one other crazy conspiracy theory about this, but like, what if the Kremlins are actually like the good guys?
Right.
You're controlling, like, King K. Rool was trying to free the bananas for everyone else who, like, all his lizard folk, reptile people. Yeah. And you are actually the anti-hero, Donkey Kong, going back and stealing all your bananas for yourself.
The bananas dropped around are not the bananas that he dropped on the way out. They're like a salary. They're a distribution of food for all of his troops.
Yeah. I'm going with that. Donkey Kong's evil.
So you're playing the bad guy? I mean, he always was, right? Where did Donkey Kong get his start?
He originally was the bad guy. So
wow.
Okay.
New light.
Yeah.
I also feel good about not liking Diddy Kong Racing even more than I already did.
Great.
Okay, cool.
All right, so let's talk about protagonists, because Donkey Kong is clearly not the protagonist. So we got to talk about someone who actually is a protagonist.
So most games seem to build a very empty main character. There's long been this argument that that's basically so that they can be a player stand-in, so you're not distracted by something that's not you. And because the point of games is more about telling a story through exploration than through narrative. But I don't know. I think I'm going to take the position that it's gone too far for too long.
That silent protagonist? There's too silent?
There's too many too silent protagonists and not enough, like real protagonists in games. And it makes a credible argument that games are still not the literate art form that they could be. That game stories are second-class stories because of it.
Yeah, I think the problem is, to me, that most of the protagonists that have their own mind to speak are incredibly annoying.
Yeah.
or just like not fleshed out very well at all. So like you have some incredibly polarizing protagonists. Like the first one that always comes to mind for me when I think about this is Titus, or Titus, as they say, from Final Fantasy X. The
perfect argument against having a fleshed out protagonist. Yeah. Or voice acting, or a voice, or hair.
Right. Yeah. Despite him, I do still enjoy that game. But yeah, it's hard to put yourself in those shoes sometimes. Whereas when you're a protagonist that I think did it really well was like, it was very easy for me to get behind being Ramza in Final Fantasy Tactics. I wanted Ramza to succeed. Ramza was great and kind of an idiot in terms of like, he couldn't get out of his own way.
Naive, but very likable, very sweet.
Like, you could root for him. I could very easily see somebody who, despite wanting to beat Final Fantasy X, was actively rooting for Titus to die at some point so that somebody else could like carry the torch.
You know what? I think a lot of it has to do with video games having roots in only one mode of story, like the straight up adversarial go fight that person story.
Yeah.
Because of this, they've never really, until very recently, put a lot of effort into making you root for the main character. It's kind of the same thing as like a dumb action movie. You are supposed to walk in knowing that you like the guy that you, it's always a guy, the guy that you identify with. And there isn't a lot of effort. There's a lot of effort put into maybe some of the other characters, but it's assumed that you'll be rooting for the person whose side you're by default on.
Yep.
But I think that really is narratively problematic. As that has stuck in video games, it has caused that particular story mode to stick for a really long time, like longer than it has to. There are beautiful games that are not inherently about going and fighting some bad guys to achieve a goal. And I think there are too few of them, and they get too little exposure because video gaming is so strongly associated with this one narrative.
Editor's note. Matthew is really bummed that he failed to mention any of these games during the podcast. If he could do it over, he would name Stardew Valley, To the Moon, Kirby's Dream Course, Overcooked, Civilization, Monkey Island, and Grim Fandango.
A question that just popped into my mind is kind of almost unrelated to what you say, but so there's one character who has seemingly one narrative throughout their entire game, but doesn't. I don't know if you'd actually call. I don't know if they're silent or not. I want you to answer this question. Is the goose from Untitled Goose Game a silent or not silent protagonist?
No, the goose from. So let's like define silent protagonist and create a spectrum here. A silent protagonist is not just someone who doesn't speak. A silent protagonist is lead character in something who doesn't speak and doesn't have enough properties to distinguish them from anyone else. They're sort of interchangeable with a lot of other characters. If you have enough personality coming through in gestures or little sounds or goals or intentions, you can be a mime and still be a well-developed character. I would say that the goose from Untitled Goose Game is a very well fleshed out silent film protagonist. It's taking advantage of the fact that you already have a lot of ideas about like what a goose or just a random loose animal would be, but because of that, you're writing a great deal of like very fixed characterization into that. You and I don't see a different goose. We see the same goose, and we would probably, if we had to like write his internal thought stream, we'd probably write the same thing.
Yeah. I
would even go so far as to say like the goose is like a silent version of the trash raccoon from Donut County.
Yeah, absolutely. no doubt in my mind. So, do you think so? To you, Chrono from Chrono Trigger, is he a silent protagonist? Because he does things. He has a personality, but he never.
I
speaks.
think Chrono is a silent protagonist, and the story lampshades that repeatedly by causing other characters to like assume that he's speaking.
Yeah.
I mean, like basically, they leave it open for you to feel like he's not a silent protagonist. That's their way of sort of softening that difficulty. Because Akira Toriyama and the other creators of that didn't. I don't think they wanted such an empty. I don't think they wanted to tell a story with such an empty main character.
No.
But that was their way of fitting the convention. But you could also read it as basically he's absolutely a silent protagonist, and the game is kind of making fun of that lampshading.
I'm glad you agreed because I didn't want to have to argue about that because I do. I firmly believe Chrono is the silent protagonist especially too because there's moments in the game where, I don't know if I have to say spoiler alert for a game that's almost 30 years old, but there's a point in the game where Chrono sacrifices himself to save the rest of the party, but that only happens if you the person holding the controller like makes him walk up into the beam of light that's about to disintegrate him. So even though you don't really have an option of doing anything else in that moment, you're the one that's making that happen. It's not Chrono getting up and saying, I'm going to go kill myself to save the rest of the you. Yep. So there's several moments like that in the game where like you can kind of take or leave what's going to happen. You can be like, do I want to plant this forest and let the world, 400 years from now have a really nice forest? Or do I just kind of want to just move along and go kill some dragons over here?
Editor's note. Trace is really upset that he didn't mention that Chrono Trigger is the only game he knows that kills the protagonist and lets you beat the game while the protagonist is dead.
Once we got to the point of developing choice and the consequences of choice in stories in games, I think everyone decided that games had to be about choice and further emptied or never bothered building their protagonists because, well, then you restrict choice. I think that Chrono is a good illustration of two things. One is that a game with a couple of simple choices and a lot of character development can often be better than a game with like blank behavior and no character development. And the other is that you can make something feel like a choice without offering another option.
Yep.
You have to walk through this because there is no other door to walk through, but you are going to be the one pulling the stick to walk through it. Still feels like you had agency and you carry the moral weight of the action.
Exactly.
Also, I think games misunderstand that like you learn a lot and feel a lot through watching the moral weight of an action rather than like pulling the trigger on it.
Sure. This
is why really over time, I think some of our favorite characters, in fact, most of our favorite characters are NPCs, not PCs.
Yeah.
Because for all that the idea of a silent protagonist is, or for all that a silent protagonist is supposed to give you your identification, you are actually built to care more about the ones that you were watching making real choices and having real growth and, like facing real dilemmas and having real opinions.
Yeah, the PCs, the NPCs do a lot more to define the silent PC.
Well, so it gives me a game design idea. I think that this one wouldn't carry across all of video games because it would get old fast. But as a flavor of game, this might work a couple of times really well. I could see a game where you, the player, are purposefully made into an orchestrator. For instance, let's say it's a space RPG and you're not a character. You don't play as a main character. You're the ship's computer. When battles happen, you arrange them. When people talk, you watch it or you get to add choices to it, but small ones. Mm-hmm. You're sort of their assistant and you're their manager, but you're not any of the main characters. So the main character can then be fully fleshed out.
Right.
And your choices are more like how much you want to tweak them in one way or another as the pretty silent manager. I think you could get a good 3 or 4 games in the history of games out of that mechanic. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think so. I think I would do that. I want to go down the spectrum a little further of silent, but not silent, developed. but developed. Yeah, I think you know where I'm going with this. So
not non-speaking roles, but with character development in them.
Mm-hmm, yeah, and the first one that we kind of thought of when we thought about this segment was Mario. Mario is full of. He's very evocative. He definitely he definitely has feelings. You know,
does.
like, you know when he's sad or happy or when he's like,
He he's filled with something like unrequited love lust. I don't know. He's kind.
yeah.
He he wants what he wants, and he does not get very much of it.
No, no, his motivation is always clear, but he's always he's incredibly optimistic.
Yeah.
He's a very hardworking guy. But yeah, like he's one of those guys who, you know, he's very dedicated to doing what he thinks is the right thing to do. He would never tell you what that thing is. He would never say anything to you other than "waha" or anything like that. But he's not silent. But
he's subtle.
He never says anything.
He's like
of
Teller
substance.
from Penn and Teller. He's subtle and he's agreeable, but you can tell that he has opinions.
Right.
He doesn't get discouraged easily. He's got a lot of very subtle like gesture mechanics for processing his discouragement. All those like whoo,
Yeah.
whoo. You know, he's
Yeah.
his life is hard, and he's not exactly shying away from that. But you know, he's letting out a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great example of not particularly needing to fill the character with voice. He's also a great example of how voice acting without speaking can be really, really effective in like cartoon settings and video game settings. Kirby is another great example.
Kirby's same. Yeah. Kirby, I think is actually, he's probably a little more on the silent spectrum than Mario is, because all you ever really see from Kirby is you see dream bubbles over his head, mostly of like candy and ice cream and cake and stuff, and you
Truly
understand,
sweet and irrepressible and a little simple.
yeah, every single one of his journeys begins with him either being woken up from a nap or having his meal stole from him. So like, you know, you know like two things about him. One, like he always wants to eat, and two, he will do whatever it takes to get his food back.
You know what else you know about Kirby? He has a streak of gleeful sadism.
Yeah.
He smiles in a lot of situations where you shouldn't smile unless you're a little bit sadistic.
Yeah.
This is particularly true in like the Smash Brothers games. He's so happy when he's cooking everybody.
He's got a little bit of peppermint butler in him.
He does have a little bit of peppermint butler in him, yeah. Would you play a peppermint butler centered game?
Yeah, for sure.
I would play ever-loving hell out of that.
Yeah,
Peppermint Butler's Demon card game. I would play for the rest of my life on a regular basis.
I kind of shudder to think about the bounds that the Peppermint Butler game would cross, and like what you would learn. You would learn a lot about people that you're playing the Peppermint Butler game, but I'd play it at least once and then maybe find myself too disgusted to ever play it again.
I would play it every day for a year.
So, a fully fleshed out actual protagonists who have feelings and opinions and emotions, who's like your favorite one?
There is a real positive choice here, and it really says something frustrating about the video game world. Like, I tried pretty hard to make a long list, and I couldn't come up with very much.
Mm-hmm.
Ramza is way up there because he's so kind. You know, Ramza is basically like likable for being good-hearted without annoying you with his good-heartedness. He's really trying to do the right thing, and I really like him for that. To the extent that he's more on the fleshed out side, I like the nameless one from Planescape Torment. He's one of the few examples in video games of a pathos character who is well fleshed out without being overbearing in his pathos. Like, I won't spoil it, but he has a really interesting reason for being kind of an emo guy and kind of a taciturn, frustrated guy. So I would put him on the list. I just in the games that you and I play, there are not that many well fleshed out protagonists in the first place.
Yeah, that's something that kind of shocked me when we started having this conversation. I spent a lot of time just kind of like thinking of people that I got to Ramza early on, and then I had a really hard time. Like,
I thought we were going to have a list of 12 and 12, and then it turned out to be a list of like 30 and 2.
And 2, yeah. No, I kept, every time I was like, it might have been unfortunate that Ramza was one of the first ones that we thought of, because then every time I thought of another protagonist, I was like, he's not as good as Ramza, so I have I didn't want to even talk about it, because I don't know. The one we talked about a little bit over text was the Dane from Final Fantasy IX.
Mm-hmm.
You liked him for what about 3/4 of the game, and then you just
Yeah.
hated his guts for the rest of the game.
Yeah.
I liked him. I think I liked him for 3/4 of the game, hated him for like a sixth of the game, and then had mixed feelings about him for whatever the remainder. I messed up the fractions horribly there, but whatever 3/4 plus 1/6 leaves me mixed feelings. I don't know what that is. I can't do the math in my head that quickly, but because he was very much I need to do the right thing, but he was also but early on he also had this. There's a fun streak of like he's just kind of a skirt chasing thief. Like I could get behind.
He kind of pulled a lot from Aladdin, actually, Disney's Aladdin.
Yeah, he totally did.
And I got to say, I liked him for that.
Yeah. So what changed about him that made you kind of just?
I feel like the more contact they had with Kuja, the more Kuja and Zidane's dynamic gravitated towards the future of Final Fantasy. I felt like I got a taste of the future, and although I kept playing to completion and enjoyed the game, I felt so frustrated by that and so convinced of what was coming that I ran away. I haven't played a Final Fantasy game since then, and I feel, like 40 minutes of Final Fantasy X, and I have rarely in my life felt so good about a choice. Certainly not in video games have I felt so good about a choice. Like, as the two of them gravitated together, they became an emo dyad that dominated the story, and I hate that. And Final Fantasy decided to lean really hard into that for the rest of time.
Yeah.
I liked not exactly the unserious Zidane, but the untroubled by the universe Zidane. He could be serious, and I would have been fine with it.
Right. I liked, he had his moments. He was one of those guys that like kept it lighthearted. But then
I think you're right, and I forgot this, but I think you're right that he came back in the end.
He did, but yeah, I think one of my favorite things about him throughout that game was the several conversations he had on the side with the Black Mage Vivi, who was because you could tell that like Zidane had this past of like not knowing where he was from or like why he ended up where he ended up, and like having this family that's not really a family, but the friends that became a family, and then he was able to kind of like big brother that same thing for Vivi along their journey, and I thought that was really cool because
that was really nice. Yeah,
he had this like sweet side to him that he like really only showed to like his best bro Vivi, and then in front of everybody else he was like this really cavalier, like cool, like carefree guy.
I forgot about that. That was really nice.
Yeah, no, he was kind of sweetheart.
Obviously, I think that like any of the top 6 Final Fantasy VI characters would have been an excellent protagonist, but I'm not going to count them because that was an ensemble cast, like truly an ensemble cast.
Yep.
But any of them could have carried a Final Fantasy game, and I would have felt pretty good about putting them in the top 5.
Absolutely.
I don't actually care that much about Cecil from Final Fantasy IV. It's just not. It's not a thing.
I found him very hard to believe.
Yeah, it's a cartoon story. You know what? Actually, I'm going to put in my top 10 Butts from Final Fantasy V. I'm Butts, and I like Butts. He's great. Butts is a Saturday morning cartoon, but that alone makes him more fleshed out than most of the other protagonists in video game space. And his cartoonishness really fits his particular world very well. Like, he's the butt of most of the jokes, and it works just fine.
Yes.
And his personality is, the classic, like, brash, want to be carefree, but brash and moralistic, and it works. Yeah.
My favorite part of, or I think my favorite Butts moment is when they realize that Ferris is a woman,
mm-hmm.
and he basically does like the Animaniacs, like, hello nurse, my eyes just got giant and my tongue just like hit the floor. Yeah. That's just who I think that to me, like, I was like, yep, that's what you are. You're the cartoon I watched Saturday morning.
Yeah.
You just realized the nurse you thought was a dude is actually a hot lady.
Yep. I don't think I'm going to give any points to Cloud or Squall because I think that they're actually a little a little tilted on the spectrum towards silent protagonists. If you're only like defining qualities that you're moody, there's not much to you. And I just won't really touch the series going forward. I think that the number 3 on my list, like really good protagonist, actually is Ness from Earthbound.
Yeah,
he's another like Mario. Like he's a silent but well fleshed out.
Yeah,
he doesn't
particularly contribute a lot. But unlike Chrono Trigger, I sort of believe the world around him when everybody, talks to him or talks about him.
Yeah.
It's just sold a lot better.
He's really fleshed out, especially around the city of Juanette, as like a popular, easy to get along with kid from like fourth grade or what.
I'm given to understand that I would feel the same way about Lucas from Mother 3.
Lucas, so it's actually Lucas is interesting. I think he has more personality given to him than Ness does. He goes back, like people go back and forth between picking on Lucas and loving Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
There's times in the game where as the city of Tazmily becomes more and more addicted to technology and Lucas rejects that, they kind of like they sort of retcon their previous emotions about him, and they're like, you know what, I come to think of it, I always thought you were kind of a shady kid, and you've always been like, you've secretly been a dick this entire time, haven't you? They do like, well, what people do, and when they kind of realize something they don't like about somebody, they try to cherry pick something from the past to
it's the Harry Potter fall term.
Yeah, exactly.
Of almost every book.
Yeah, it's like, oh, we were there for you when your mom died, and look what you're doing to the community. You're tearing it apart. Like, is this what she would have wanted? It's like, oh, like, and you feel so bad for Lucas. Or I felt bad for Lucas. You should.
Are there modern, like, released within the last 10 years, non-silent protagonists that you would? For a second, points to silent protagonists for Portal. Chell from Portal was the correct thing to have in counterpoint to GLaDOS, because GLaDOS kind of picked at you, and you really needed someone who stood up and bore it rather than, like fighting back in words. And so that worked. Is there a modern, like, last 10 years title with a non-silent, like, well fleshed out protagonist that you, like, genuinely liked? I've really been struggling with this.
I know. The closest thing I could think of, and it's an ensemble though, so it's not going to meet the exact specifications of your question, but I think several of the Octopath characters as an ensemble, where if they had been given their own game, would have been like good protagonists.
Okay, so we both said that about a game, but do you feel like there might be an argument here that game stories and game characters stand up better under ensemble cast than they do under, like, solo protagonists?
I don't think I have enough to say that I feel that way. I actually, because one of the things that I disliked about Octopath Traveler is how the characters weren't fleshed out enough. I felt like you got a taste of several different characters, some of which I liked, others which I didn't super care for, and I found myself wishing for like 75% of that game that I could throw away like 3 character stories and have them just, like, instead of being the main guy here, if you were just my tank, you're an NPC tank that I could recruit to my team, and I could take all of your skills and stuff and just have you on my team as a guy who supports the main character for one reason or another. Like, that would be great, and I wouldn't have to learn anything about you or care about, like, why you're here to begin with.
This is one of many reasons that I dismissed almost every NPC from my party in Final Fantasy Tactics. My party was Ramza and a bunch of nameless people.
Yeah.
That was great. So this leads me to ask, for the game that you and I have been designing on and off for the last year or so, are there any lessons that this process, thinking about silent and non-silent protagonists, are going to let us bring to that process?
Yeah, it's kind of, I never considered actually wanting to write a game where the main character did not speak. It never occurred to me. And now what I kind of would want to do is not make the main character silent, and not maybe only slightly more evocative than Mario. I think there's a really good space between, like, this character will have lines of their own, like, it's not going to be just a menu yes or no or like shaking your head, but I want a lot of options. I want there to be forks that you can take at several points throughout this character's development. There's, like, let's say there's like 10 different final versions of the main character of this game, and like you kind of determine how they end up at like whatever endpoint they end up at by decisions you make along the way. Like they should have a personality.
Limited degree of choices, yeah.
Yeah, there's a personality, but in terms of what drives them, you kind of get to choose that.
Yeah. It's kind of helped me realize we've had difficulty sometimes writing his side of humor. We've had an easy time writing the humor of the world in general, but he's been the hardest character to nail down his lines, for me at least. Mm-hmm. And I'm starting to feel like we've written a character who's better reacting to things than he is like conversing with things.
Oh yeah.
And I think I agree that basically lends itself to not the silent protagonist, not the empty one, but the well fleshed out character who doesn't say very much, the Mario style character.
Yeah. True to like the games we've grown up and enjoyed, I've had way more, I don't want to say I've had way more fun. It's been,
I have. I will say that.
It's been a lot of fun to do the NPCs.
Yeah.
Writing like the 1 to 2, 3-line kind of conversations you'll have with an NPC. Or it's been a lot easier. I found that like, oh, I did a good job of that. Whereas if I was writing a story that involved like the main character, I would have to like, it took a lot more thinking to be like, oh, what should he say here? Because he actually like it carries.
But I feel good because he has well-defined character growth, and we're not at a loss for like how he wants to end up. You say there could be like 10 different final versions of the character. I think you and I already have in mind like 4 or 5 of those versions in our head.
Yeah.
And roughly how he would get there.
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily change the end of the story. It just kind of changes how he talks about being at the end of the story, maybe.
All right, I think we're good. We have been the friends who live on mountains.
We are the friends who talked good games. Talk to you next time.
See you next time.